An emperor met his bloody end not on a battlefield, but in his own bathroom. The most protected man in the ancient world was killed in his most private moment. By the end of this story, you will understand the dark political machinery that made such a shocking murder not just possible, but necessary. How did assassins breach the innermost sanctum of imperial power, and whose ambition was so great they would orchestrate this ultimate betrayal? What does it truly take to bring down a king when the throne itself is the most dangerous place of all? At just 14 years old, a boy priest from Syria was thrust onto the most powerful throne in the world. His name was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, though history remembers him by the name of his god, Heliogabalus. He did not earn his position through military victory or political cunning, but through a grandmother's ambitious claim that he was the illegitimate son of a previous emperor. The Roman legions, eager for a change, rallied to this teenage figurehead, and so began a reign that would shock and destabilize the empire. For 4 chaotic years, from 218 to 222, this young emperor seemed to go out of his way to alienate everyone who held power in Rome. His first and most profound offense was religious. Heliogabalus was not merely a devotee of the sun god Elagabal, he was its high priest, and he arrived in Rome determined to replace Jupiter, the king of the Roman gods, with his own foreign deity. He forced senators to participate in rituals where they had to run alongside his holy chariot, and he married a Vestal virgin, a woman sworn to celibacy, in a direct and stunning violation of sacred Roman law. This was not just a personal preference, it was a fundamental attack on the state religion, the very glue that held Roman society together. The elite saw this not as eccentricity, but as tyranny. His personal life became a weapon for his enemies. Rumors swirled of extravagant banquets with foods made of gold, and of his preference for dressing in fine silks and elaborate makeup, behaviors that the traditionally austere Roman aristocracy viewed as weak and decadent. He was said to surround himself with charioteers and dancers, elevating them to positions of authority while snubbing the established noble families. Every action seemed calculated to offend, from his marriages to his public appearances. He was, in the eyes of the Senate, the military, and his own Praetorian Guard, an emperor who held Roman tradition in contempt. With each passing month, the list of those he had insulted grew longer and more powerful. The very guards sworn to protect his life grumbled at his behavior. The senators whose respect he needed plotted in silence. Even his own family, the powerful women who had engineered his rise, began to see him as a liability threatening their survival. He was creating a perfect storm of resentment, a conspiracy waiting for its moment. The most dangerous man in Rome was, without realizing it, building a prison of enemies around himself, brick by angry brick. The plot found its moment not in the Senate house or on the battlefield, but in the cold, echoing marble of a latrine. An imperial Roman bathroom was far from a private retreat. It was often a social space, a row of stone seats with keyhole openings, where political deals were whispered and the city's gossip flowed as freely as the water in the channels below. Yet for all its public nature, the act of relieving oneself was a moment of profound physical vulnerability. The conspirators understood this intimately. They would not have needed to navigate the complex sewers, a feat nearly impossible in the guarded palace. The killers were almost certainly already inside. They were the Praetorian guardsmen posted at the door, the trusted attendants who handled the emperor's linen and water. Betrayal did not have to break in, it was already standing watch. To strike him down here was a message carved in blood and excrement. A violent death in the bedchamber might be seen as an assassination. A murder in the latrine was a desecration. It was designed to strip Heliogabalus of all dignity, to reduce the high priest of the sun god to a butchered body in the most base and humiliating setting imaginable. His corpse was not simply killed, it was dragged through the streets, mutilated and denied proper rites before being thrown into the Tiber River. This was not just the removal of a political problem, it was a ritual cleansing. The Senate and the Guard were erasing a stain on Rome itself, and they chose a location that would ensure his legacy was one of shame, not martyrdom. The murder weapon was the sword, but the true instrument of destruction was the location itself, a final, brutal insult to an emperor who had insulted all of Rome. The question is no longer who wanted the young emperor dead, but who did not. His murder required a conspiracy of silence and action that stretched from the marble halls of the palace to the barracks of his own guards. At the heart of this web sat his grandmother, Julia Misa. She was the master architect of his reign, the powerful Syrian matriarch who had once declared a teenage boy emperor to reclaim her family's control of the throne. Now she faced a terrible calculation. Her grandson was no longer an asset, he was an existential threat. His relentless provocations were pushing the empire toward a civil war that would consume them all. To save the dynasty she had built, she appears to have made the cold, pragmatic choice to sacrifice the emperor she created. Her approval, whether a quiet nod or an explicit command, was the conspiracy's essential green light. Her instrument for this regime change was already living in the palace, Heliogabalus's own cousin, a boy named Alexander Severus. While one emperor offended Rome, his family was quietly grooming his replacement. Alexander was presented as everything Heliogabalus was not: moderate, respectful of tradition, and malleable. The Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers sworn to protect the emperor, saw in Alexander a promise of stability and a return to their privileged status. Their loyalty had been eroded month by the emperor's bizarre behavior and his clear preference for other companions. When the order came, the men who were supposed to be his last line of defense became his executioners. This was not a spontaneous mutiny, but a coordinated strike. So what was the true motive? It was all these things layered together. For Julia Misa, it was a brutal act of political triage, cutting away a doomed limb to save the family body. For the Praetorian Guard, it was a restoration of their honor and a guarantee of their pay and power. For the Senate, it was the removal of a sacrilegious tyrant who mocked their gods and their laws. They formed a coalition of the discontented, each faction with its own reasons for wanting the young priest king gone. The assassination was a surgical removal planned by his grandmother, approved by the political class, and carried out by his bodyguards. But why did they feel this bloody act was the only option left? What final, unforgivable line did Heliogabalus cross that sealed his fate? The final moments unfolded in a storm of shouting steel and panic. As the young emperor and his mother sought refuge in the latrine, the very men tasked with their protection turned on them. The Praetorian Guard, once the symbol of imperial safety, became a murderous mob within those cold, marble confines. The historian Cassius Dio recorded the grim scene, describing how they cut down Heliogabalus and killed his mother beside him. But the violence did not end with their deaths. The guards decapitated the emperor's body, a final, symbolic act of severing him from the office he had disgraced. His remains were then dragged through the streets of Rome, a brutal public spectacle designed not just to kill a man, but to annihilate his legacy. The citizens watched as the mutilated corpse of their divine emperor was paraded through the dust, a clear message from the powers of Rome. This was not merely an assassination, it was a complete and utter rejection of everything he represented. His reign was being purged from the city's memory with every brutal scrape against the stone pavement. His body, eventually thrown into the Tiber River, denied the burial rites essential for any Roman's passage to the afterlife. The cleansing was total. This physical erasure was followed by an official one, a legal and cultural process known as damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Across the empire, stonemasons were sent to monuments and inscriptions, carefully chiseling away the name Heliogabalus. His image was defaced on statues, his official portraits destroyed. The Senate declared his reign null and void, an aberration not to be spoken of or remembered. It was as if he had never existed. Into this void stepped his cousin, Alexander Severus, the boy his grandmother had so carefully prepared. The new regime moved swiftly to restore traditional Roman order, publicly venerating the old gods and showing deference to the Senate. Alexander was portrayed as the anti-Heliogabalus, a moderate and pious youth who would respect the ancient customs. The powerful coalition that had orchestrated the murder now worked to present a unified front of stability and a return to normalcy. But could this new, young emperor, installed by the same violent machinery, ever truly escape the shadow of the bloody bathroom and the cousin whose name was erased from history? Heliogabalus was killed because he broke an unspoken contract with Rome. His 4-year reign was a cascade of provocations, a direct challenge to the political and religious traditions that gave the empire its identity. In response, a powerful coalition formed, uniting his own grandmother, the Senate, and his personal guard in a single, brutal purpose. His murder in the latrine was the ultimate expression of their contempt, a desecration designed to humiliate as much as to eliminate. This story stands apart in the long history of imperial assassinations. It was not a simple power grab by a rival general. It was the Roman establishment collectively enforcing its norms, proving that even an emperor's power had limits. The throne could protect a man from foreign armies, but not from the fury of the system he betrayed. So we are left with a final, haunting question. Was Heliogabalus the depraved tyrant history often paints him as a reckless youth who deserved his bloody fate? Or was he a misunderstood reformer, a young man of sincere faith whose attempts to introduce a new god were crushed by a rigid and unforgiving conservative elite? The truth, as always, likely lies somewhere in the shadows between these two extremes. What do you believe? Share your own interpretation of this ancient mystery in the comments below, and subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten stories that shaped our world.